Can a buyer back out of a purchase agreement the day before closing? This just happened. I have a closing scheduled for tomorrow, midday. I get a call from the buyer's agent about an hour ago. He said, "I'm sorry to tell you, but my buyers have changed their minds. That's it. We're closing tomorrow." And all these things are in motion. The seller is buying a home about 2 hours away. They need the money from the closing tomorrow in order to make that purchase happen. We've been under contract for about 35 days. Usually when a sale falls apart, it happens in the first 10 days, not the day before closing. In fact, I've been doing this for 21 years. I've never had this happen before. I've had it happen along the way, and we're used to navigating through that, but now we have one that actually happened within 24 hours. So I had to call my seller and deliver the really bad news. And I hate to have to do that, but it's my job. And so now we need to go back on the market. So in today's video, I'm going to walk you through, I'm going to share with you what happens now. Is it even legal? What happens to the buyer's earnest money? What are the consequences of this buyer breach? And what does the seller have for any recourses? So stay tuned to this video. I'm going to walk you through what happens when a buyer actually cancels the contract the day before closing.
Hi, Kevin Yoder, team leader of Yoder Real Estate, bringing to you valuable information about all things real estate and living and working in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area that you cannot find anywhere else. And if you like this video, make sure you like it and subscribe to it so that you can see more content just like this.
Okay, so it was quite a surprise that I get the call from the buyer's agent. He felt badly, and I know he does. It wasn't his fault. The buyers literally said that they freaked out. It's kind of a financial thing, and they changed their minds. So that happens again, but it usually happens during the inspection period. So let's talk about the earnest deposit. It's called the earnest deposit or good faith deposit, depending on where you are in the country. Here we call it both. We call it EMD, earnest money deposit. So those are the three terms. This represents an amount of money that the buyer submits with their offer, and it usually gets held at the title company or the listing or the buyer's agent's office in an escrow account until such time that it closes, and then that money transfer. Think about the earnest deposit as more of a down payment. And they're saying to the seller, I am putting forth this offer in earnest. And so it's there so that if the buyer walks away from the contract, the seller, in theory, should get that amount. So the amounts range from, let's say, $3,000 up to, say, $20,000. It really depends on the purchase price. So the higher the purchase price, the higher the earnest money deposit. There's not a fixed amount. There's not a required amount. You can actually submit $1, but clearly the higher the better in the eyes of the seller. And if a buyer wants to put forth a strong offer, they're going to want that earnest money deposit to be even higher. So within every purchase agreement, let's talk about the purchase agreement contingencies. There's really two major ones. One is the financing contingency. So if a buyer fails to basically comply with the lender's guidelines for approval, they can't get approved, then their financing doesn't happen, and then they could technically get out of the contract by virtue of that. Now, that should all be sorted out up front. So by the time a buyer puts an offer on a home, they really shouldn't be in shaky waters with the lender. Occasionally that happens. Occasionally we get a pre-approval letter over, we review it. It looks solid, but they didn't really check everything they could have. They didn't cross the T's and dot the I's. So we're midway through a contract and it falls apart because, for example, they didn't collect their pay stubs, or maybe their income wasn't verified. That doesn't happen very much anymore, but occasionally it does. But that is a contingency. So we want to make sure that that one is cleared. And in this case, it actually was. We were through the financing contingency, and a part of that, a subset of the financing contingency, is also the appraisal, which means that if the home doesn't appraise for the purchase price, then buyer and seller can't get into an agreement on who's going to pay for the delta between those two numbers. The sale falls apart. The second contingency, this is the biggest one, would be the inspection contingency. Inspections are either A, waived, or B, identified a certain timeline when they're going to happen. And so they could be 1 day up to, say, 10 days after the signing of the purchase agreement that those inspections are going to happen. During that time, the buyer can walk away from the contract free and clear, get their earnest money back, and that's it. The seller puts the home back in the market. In this case, both contingencies have been met. Actually, three. If you talk about the financial contingency, the inspection contingency, and the appraisal contingency, all were met in this case. And so now we're moving into the closing, and the buyer backs out of the sale. So what happens with this? Here's the deal. You can't really force a buyer to buy a house. So in this case, there is a term called specific performance. If it was the other way around, where the seller changed their mind, then the buyer could technically sue for specific performance, and they could actually force a sale. I think California has a very rigid rule on that, specific performance. I haven't seen it happen here in Michigan. However, the buyer could technically sue for costs incurred with that purchase as well. So let's just say it was reversed and it's the day before closing, and the seller decides they're not going to sell the house. Well, the buyer could say, okay, look, I've got this tied up in inspections, I've got this tied up in appraisal, I've got my moving company, I put a deposit down on that, I have this I purchased, and you're going to just change your mind. That would go to court, and the buyer would probably win in that case. So in this case, what happens as a seller recourse? Well, unfortunately, even though the seller does get to keep the earnest money deposit, in this case it's about $3,000, that's not really enough to compensate the seller for what's happened. And here's why. Because we listed about 35, 40 days ago. The market was slightly different then. There was less homes on the market. Now we're hitting the market again as a new listing, but it's not actually new. It actually reads back on the market. So whenever you have a home that's off the market, then back on the market, it says back on the market, everyone wants to know what's wrong. Well, nothing's wrong with the house. This is a buyer's financing. It's not really their financing, but they just had a situation. Let me put it that way. And so now we're back on the market. I say that it's like we're having a black eye, like we got punched in the eye, okay? Because we lost velocity. Now we're trying to get back on as quickly as possible. My job now is to go out and find a new buyer at the same price or higher than we were before. So in this way, this is why it's important that earnest money deposit is as much as possible so that we can offer the seller something, some recourse for having to go off the market, on the market, and deal with now unraveling a lot of things that they had in their lives. So that's what happened in this case. Now the seller gets the earnest money deposit, $3,000 sent to them in a form of a check. So here's the thing with this one though. We have those contingencies in place. This doesn't happen all that often. And if it does happen and the buyer literally just walks away, like in this case, then that money does go back to the seller. So just be conscious of that. If you're a buyer looking at a home and you're not sure about whether you think you're going to make it to the closing table, try to do that as quickly as possible. Don't wait to the end because you're just dragging this thing on for no reason. It's really putting the seller in a damaging situation. So hopefully this is helpful for you today. I know what my job is now. I need to get back on the phone and start making calls and marketing that property again. And if you're somebody that's a seller and you are in this situation, remember that it's step one, get back in the market. Step two is your agent should be diligently looking for opportunities. And fortunately, I have many of them because this home was in a multiple offer situation. I'm gonna get back on the phone and call all the agents that had potential interest in the property. That's first step. Second step was to get it back on the market. We already are. And third step is to get another offer and get it sold. Hopefully this video was helpful for you today. If you're looking to sell your home and you want to navigate through the process in a smooth and easy way, reach out to us at Yoder Real Estate. Go to yoderrealestate.com. This is what we do. This is everyday real estate. As I mentioned, this is bringing the realness back to real estate because this is a real thing that just happened. Now, I wanted to give you the insights as to how I deal with that. When I called my seller, I said, I have news and I have other news. Notice I didn't say bad news. And the reason is because oftentimes we're able to get in there and sell it for more money than we did the first time. So that's my very clear intentions. I have my marching orders and I already had that in motion before I called my seller back. So this is what we do. And I'm bringing the realness to real estate for you so you can hear what happens in real time, and I'll continue to do that and bring as much value here. So if you like this video and you want to learn more about how to navigate through a real estate transaction, even when they're not so ideal, come back to this channel often. Click the like button if you like the video. Share some love in this video. Share a comment if you have a question, and make sure you share this with your friends and family, anybody that's going through the real estate sales process. We look forward to connecting with you real soon. Have a great day.